Good morning, everyone. This is Gautam.
Morning, guys. This is John.
So, John, this is your third week at Workato.
Yeah.
John recently joined us as the product manager for WorkBot. All right. So, I think today we'll cover a number of different use cases, and then we'll sort of do a little bit of a deep dive into some of them. And just before we actually go into some use cases, I just want to give you sort of like a conceptual framework for WorkBot. So what WorkBot does is it helps any Slack user. I mean, it is like any Slack bot, and a Slack user can interface with WorkBot through DM, or WorkBot can be part of a channel that a user is in. And WorkBot is actually powered by Workato recipe. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. And Workato recipes, essentially, you can build logic and without having to really write any code. Workato connects with several hundred different applications, which means that you can actually build sort of use cases that sort of that are exposed to the end user via Slack to work with any of these apps. You can have sort of use cases that span multiple apps and so on. So, for example, really simple things. WorkBot can work in an interactive mode. You can ask WorkBot a question, and WorkBot gets back to you with an answer. And also, WorkBot has built-in capabilities for collecting the input. So, you may wish it to take a certain action that requires 5 input parameters. WorkBot has a built-in capability to do that. WorkBot is also very useful in notifications. If something happens in the Northeast region for a customer that is over X in value, I want to be notified. You can do that. So I'll show you some sort of, how it looks like. I think it's much easier to follow what WorkBot does. So here, I am sort of WorkBot. I'm sort of having a DM conversation with WorkBot, and this particular WorkBot is configured to connect with a few different applications. So in this case, it's Jira, Salesforce, and so on. And the way WorkBot understands what are the different apps that it can work with is based on the recipes that are built in that particular Workato account. So, for example, this is a simple recipe. It's a simple WorkBot recipe, and in this particular case, it is getting whenever there's a new user created in Workday, it posts a notification to Slack. So anytime you build these recipes and you connect them up to a particular Slack connection, then WorkBot sort of knows that these are the different applications that this particular WorkBot can work with. So now let me sort of dig in a little bit, and I can say, what do we have here with Salesforce? So these are specific things that I can do with this WorkBot that are related to Salesforce. So, for example, the first one is requesting an approval. The second one is list my opportunities. And then the third one is a notification. Notification, you have the ability to turn them on or off, but let's actually go look at list opportunity. So each of these commands that you see is powered by a Workato recipe. So in this case, when I clicked on list opportunity, WorkBot went to my Salesforce account and looked up all the opportunities that sort of were assigned to me. I'm not in sales, so fortunately, this is not a bad chart for that. So if I had opportunities and leads and so on, it would show sort of a pie chart reflecting that. And again, what is happening in the back when I click that button? There's a Workato recipe that goes to Salesforce, collects the data, creates the chart, and sends it back. And Slack has really cool widgets that they have. They have buttons, they have pick lists, they have dialogues. All of those UI widgets are available from within a Workato recipe. So when you're creating the recipe and you're choosing to respond back, you can say, I want to use a pick list, I want to use I want to use a button, I want to use a dialogue, and so on. Okay. So again, in this case, I can sort of continue on. This is actually a workflow that we use within the company. Like a lot of sales folks, our sales folks also love to put all the information in Salesforce, but often this actually helps. So WorkBot is configured at Workato. Every Friday, it goes and pings salespeople to make sure that they update their pipeline status. In fact, we have another WorkBot command. What that does is, as soon as a salesperson wraps up a sales call, it actually then follows up with them to say, hey, how did this call go? Are there any notes that you want to sort of add to Salesforce, and so on? So lots of very, very interesting use cases. So this is the recipe. John, I guess, when you're in one of your demos, you're going to go a little bit deeper. So I'll sort of continue to show a few more use cases before we jump into some of the details. But again, as you can sort of, it's pretty, you can tell here is a response. This is sort of, this is the, just for those that are joining new, recipes have two constructs, important constructs. One is a trigger. The trigger tells the user how to actually sort of, when this recipe should do work. So a trigger could be, in this case, the trigger was a new customer in a new employee in Workday. A trigger could be a new command to WorkBot. A trigger could be do something every Monday morning at 9 a.m. So lots of different types of triggers. And then actions are, what are the set of steps that you want to take when the trigger event occurs. So you can do very sophisticated things. I mean, this is a very basic recipe, but if I'll stop it for a second, and I'll show you that these are sort of the primitives that are available in a recipe. You can take actions, conditional actions. If you're working with lists and you want to sort of repeat an action for every step in that list, you would use a repeat action. Sometimes recipes can get really long. I've seen recipes that are over 100 steps long, but clearly that is too long. So we also support the decomposition. So you can have one recipe call another recipe, so make things simpler, but also reusable. Then, of course, if you want to stop processing, you can use this. And the action with error handler is a bit more sophisticated, but essentially for those sort of that have a programming background, it is like a try-catch block. So you basically say that I want to try taking the following actions, and if any one of them fails, I want to take the following corrective action. So it's a great way to implement compensating transactions. It's also great for sort of retrying when you know that this is a certain type of error, that if you retry it again, like when someone has a cursor lock, there's a very good chance if you retry it, it'll work. So all of those things are doable with try-catch. So I wanted to show you a couple of different variations of how you can interact with WorkBot. The first one, I think we did this, but this particular one features Slack dialogues, which is really cool because it is sort of a way to provide structure input. You're able to sort of do up to 5 fields. So it's actually quite popular in our customer base. So for example, I can say create incident. And then, in larger companies, they have several categories of incidents. And depending on the category that you pick, the workflow could be completely different. So oftentimes, the very first thing is it asks for the incident type. And then I can just say, conference room audit. This pick list is dynamic. And what I mean by dynamic is it is not sort of, you're not putting the set of possible values in the recipe. The values in the pick list can actually be queried at runtime. So that way, let's say, you started the recipe and then in your Workday or in sort of, let's say, in your HR system, something changed. When you query it dynamically, that will show up as a new option. So in this case, we had a set available, but if somebody added a new category in ServiceNow, it'll automatically show up. So this is sort of a Slack dialog, and as you can tell, within dialogues you can also have pick lists. So I'm just going to pick something, can put a date in here, kind of a little back in time, but and that's it. So at this point, all that input is collected. WorkBot takes that, goes to ServiceNow, and should create. It just created an incident there. So as you can tell, I mean, buttons are super compelling. It's sort of it's also much more precise, right? I mean, you are presented with a set of options. You click on them, and it's sort of quite definitive in sort of what it does. But we are also seeing a lot of interest in customers, especially in help desk use cases where sort of the larger sort of the set of all the employees in the company, when they interact with help desk, there's a lot of interest in something a little bit more conversational. So meaning, you sort of chat with it like you're talking to some other Slack user, and then sort of the WorkBot respond. So for example, I can say, hey, I need help. And in this case, the bot is actually configured with an NLU option. So I will actually get into that in a little bit, but I'll continue on with sort of the demo first. So the bot came back and said, hey, okay, I can help you with something. So I'm going to say I have a blue jeans issue. So now the bot comes back. It understands, blue jeans is associated with certain type of hardware. So it comes back and asks me, what platform, I guess, the issues associated with. And then it went and into the knowledge base to basically search to see if there was anything useful. So just to step back, the big interest that we are seeing in this use case, though I sort of talked about this use case in the context of conversational integration, but the use case itself is super powerful. Large companies, with lots of employees, they have a central help desk function, and on a daily basis, they can get hundreds, if not thousands, of requests from their customers, the employees. And what a lot of CIOs are thinking about is putting a bot for a couple of reasons. One, the bot learns over time, but also the bot can be more responsive, as in it could immediately sort of, if it has seen this type of issue, or if it has seen this issue as already being a known issue, the bot could immediately respond. So essentially create a more compelling user experience for the employee. That is one, and also the other is, of course, the more the bot does, the less sort of a reliance on it frees up IT to do more sort of more interesting things. So the bot essentially went search ServiceNow. It found a link, and I can click on the link, and it's a lot of text, and so. I really don't want to read it, or it's not looking very helpful. So I'm going to say it didn't help. I mean, it is a bot, so something it didn't help. So at this point, I mean, of course, the logic of what this particular bot does is entirely up to us. It is what our recipe dictates it to do. So we can have much more sophisticated things happen here. But in this case, just to keep the demo simple, it just does the knowledge-based search and gets back. So it says, should I just create a ticket for you? And I can say yes. And at this point, what it does is, based on my interaction with the bot so far, the bot essentially extracts the right pieces of information, and then it goes ahead and creates a ticket in ServiceNow on my behalf. So it saved me, going into another form, typing all the information, or another form, or actually having to log into ServiceNow to do this, an extra login and so on. So it went and basically created the ticket, And people do a lot of follow-on interesting things here. Oftentimes, they would say, hey, do you want me to sort of Slack you on the updates on this ticket? Or it could say, especially in some companies, what we have seen is at this point, it also sort of says, do you want to talk to so-and-so? And then, takes them into a DM with an IT help desk person. So all that logic is sort of up to you, the end user, and it really sort of, you can build very powerful use cases around this. So this was a help desk use case around NLU. We're also seeing a lot of interest in reports. Essentially, think about, we also support, actually, before I go into that, maybe I should give you a little bit more background into how this works. I think that would help. So when you use WorkBot, every sort of thing that you address to WorkBot, either from a channel or in a DM, is intercepted by WorkBot, and then it essentially figures out the intent of what the user is trying to do, and then that is typically that intent manifests itself into a command, which is essentially a Workato recipe. So that is the default behavior, and we provide basic sort of, I wouldn't call what we do NLU, but let's say a powerful parser that sort of understands, parses what you do and then figures out intent. But we also allow you to plug in third-party NLU providers like API.ai or Amazon Lex. So what happens in that case is when you configure your recipe to actually use a third-party NLU service, whenever any sort of message addressed to WorkBot is actually sent to the NLU layer, and then that conversation continues on till an intent is identified. And when the intent is identified, it then executes the corresponding Workato command. So that is, in this example, I actually used API.ai. So in terms of modeling the conversation, the intents, all of that can be done with within API.ai. Is Dialogflow now. So all of that can be done in that product, and some of the larger companies that we work with, they already have a ton of this built up in their favorite NLU service. So Workato can plug into something that you already have, as you can sort of imagine, there are several use cases. The other place where we see a lot of interest is in finding reports. You're sort of, you can actually extend Lex out to actually talk to it as well. So this is sort of a very exciting, lots of different use cases around this. Any questions? Yeah.
So Gautam, one question, is this API.ai, is that part of something Workato, or if a companies has their own AI platform, or how can they plug that in?
So API.ai is a Google product. It's there are several companies that specialize in NLU, and Workato can work with any one of them. We have a very simple interface that basically, it is like a Workato connector. So for those that sort of understand Workato terminology, the way Workato works with different applications is you build that connector. In a lot of cases, we build that connector and make it available on our platform. And similarly, to work with any of these services is just like building any other connector. The Workato SDK can be used to build these connectors, but these are special in the sense that we expect 3 additional interfaces to be implemented for WorkBot to be able to plug into this.
Okay.
And Lex is from Amazon, which is another quite popular NLU, and also which seems to be quite interesting.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, this is I think we sort of quickly talked about this. This is sort of the intents that we built in. This is the training set and so on. All right. So, John, do you want to sort of show the approvals use case?
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing, Gautam. So yeah, hi guys. Thanks for tuning in. So it's my third week, and yeah, thanks Gautam for having me do this. So, anyways, yeah, I would like to share a use case basically. So we're here now, right? Okay.
So, John, perhaps we could get started by walking through the recipe.
Okay.
And then we can go into the demo itself. And I think sort of how do you get started? How do you build a simple recipe? I think maybe we can get started from there, and then we can go into how it all comes together.
Okay. So yeah, I think Gautam shared a little bit about this pretty useful use case. So I don't know whether you guys have experienced this before, but essentially what's happening here is you have a new executive, a sales executive or an account manager that's just recently been hired. And so on Workday, his employment data has just been newly created or updated. Okay. And what happens typically is that HR who uses that HR department that uses Workday, they tell the IT team to provision a Salesforce account for the sales exec, right? IT says okay, but then they need approval from the sales exec's manager to allow this new employee to get this access to this Salesforce account.
So basically, the idea is that when an employee joins, automatically we want to create an account in Salesforce or ServiceNow,
exactly,
depending on what department, what title, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, depending on the role on Workday. Yeah, so let's just dive into the recipe. So once again, the recipe is made up of a trigger and a bunch of actions, right? So again, here the trigger is a new or updated worker on Workday. So what this does is it basically checks if there is a new or updated worker on Workday. Okay, so if that's true, then it will execute the actions. So in these actions,
I see. So basically, what we're trying to do is we have an extra condition on the trigger to see if this employee is in active state, because the trigger is new, updated. Then updated could also mean that the employee has left. So that is why we are looking at the active. I assume that's why we are doing that.
Yes. Cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so what we want to do right now is basically monitor the actions for error. So in this step here, in action number 2, we are basically checking what kind of role this new worker is. So in this case, he's in IT operations, right? Yeah. Okay. So moving on. Yeah. So okay, this is where it gets pretty cool. So here, the action is actually for WorkBot to post a command reply on to the employee onboarding channel, where the approving manager is using. Okay. So basically, what it tells you.
John, just sort of to step back a little bit. So this is essentially to post a command to WorkBot.
Yep.
We use this particular action, right?
Yeah.
So we first selected the application, and the application in this case is WorkBot. And in this case, we're using WorkBot for Slack.
Yeah.
And so we selected that, and then the specific action. I mean, there's several actions, but the one that we chose was post, which essentially has WorkBot posting to Slack.
Yes.
And so when you're posting to Slack, you want to know what channel to post. It could be DM, and the channel itself could also be computed dynamically, right? In this case, we actually selected from the pick list of available channels, but you can also sort of construct it dynamically by sort of using a data element to figure out what the channel is.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, cool.
And in this case, it is sending it to a channel so that anybody that is in the channel can actually respond to that. Because sometimes if it is, if a new employee is joining, you may also decide just to send a DM to their manager.
Yeah, that's also possible. That's also possible.
Got
yeah.
it.
But yeah, in this case, the managers in this channel called employee onboarding. Basically, what WorkBot does is it prompts or it informs the manager that, hey, there's a new employee being onboarded, and they should be in provision with the following accounts. Okay, so it gives some basic details, and I'll show this later on Slack. Some basic details about who is this employee, what kind of roles that he has, what roles he's playing. So over here, you can see that he's a systems analyst, he's from the internal systems department, etc., and when he's starting. And also, it also displays, what kind of applications he would require, right? Yeah.
So this is the data mapping portion of it.
Yeah.
And also, I think while we were sort of going through this, looks like we have different types of constructs available, right? Some are attachments, some of them are, we also ask for a message type, and then we have buttons and so on. So this is where the decision is made in terms of what is the visual that I want the end user to see. So they can configure the relevant parts of this to create the right message type.
Yes.
So, and just to, I think so if you click on this tells us, what part of the message that you're actually creating here. So in this particular case, because it's basic text, and in a Slack message, this line just below WorkBot, this is where your basic text will go.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And so you can do the same thing also. Thanks for pointing that out. You can click the other what's this is, and be like it will inform you like where it would appear when the message presents on Slack. Yeah. So
the entire message is put together through this action.
Yeah, exactly. And you can go crazy, right? You can like craft a really nice and beautiful message. So you can even put the message type, which is the vertical bar. So that helps the user key in the correct information. Without having to go into individual applications to do this. Yeah.
And the input data is coming from the data tree.
Yes. So basically, remember the triggers from Workday, right? So all the information here come out. The output information from the trigger comes out over here, and you can use them in subsequent action steps. So these are all the data pills. We'll show you how we'll be using these worker data in the next recipe.
So John, there is a question. These, if you scroll up a little.
Okay.
The action section had like
further up, or
further up for the Slack work. So there are three different parameters, like in the action section, like there was scroll down, like where you select the channel. So could you explain how these work in the context of the WorkBot interaction, the application, the basic?
The application. So
like how do you configure, like when you showed the demo, there were buttons, right? Like,
that's right.
I understand all those are customizable. So how is that configured? Like how the button shows up, and how the labels are set. So if you could just walk through.
Okay. So it's actually it's a good question. Everything in WorkBot, I guess, sort of really comes down to two types of interactions. One is a command. It is like a / command, but it just accessed differently. So one is a command. A command is when a user basically asks WorkBot to do something. So it is initiated by the user. And the second is a notification. A notification is when something happens somewhere in the world, the Slack user wants to be notified. So those are the two sort of basic interactions. And what we do is, in order to provide a help system and also have a basic sort of language for communicating with the bot, we actually sort of have the user categorize them. So for example, if you're building a command, we sort of ask the user to say, what is the name of this command? We ask them to say, what is the applications it's associated with? The application can be one of the applications that are already supported by Workato, but it can also be a custom app. And then finally, it is the actual verb. So for example, do you want to create a ticket in ServiceNow? So in this case, ServiceNow is the application, create is the word, and ticket is the object. So that is the basic language that we have. And then for notifications, we just want to know what application, because a notification, there is no verb acting on it. So, and just to sort of, I mean, I think my explanation is probably not particularly useful, but I'll show you how it all manifests itself here. So that having sort of that syntax helps us do things like this. So for example, now the way, we know that the different apps this particular WorkBot has access to is basically built on that knowledge. So when we go through all the recipes associated with a particular WorkBot connection, we then figure out, what are the different applications this WorkBot can talk to, and that is how we build this menu. And then further, based on sort of the different verb information, we are able to say, what are the specific things you can do with ServiceNow. So in this case, there's a number of things you can do, but this is why we sort of have this structure. The structure helps us actually sort of provide a help system, but also it forms a basis for the language to interact with it. So if you see show incident here, you can either click the button or you can actually type ServiceNow show incident. You can, so it's sort of, it is the basis for the Workato, the WorkBot language.
So can you type back to the recipe screen how the commands and the text all line up?
Okay, so this is a notification. Notification is a little bit simpler. So why don't we show it in the context of a command? And so this is a command. So command is something is driven by the user. So the trigger to use is the WorkBot new command trigger. And then so here you see there's an application, the actual action, and the data, the business data that it acts on. And the application you basically select from one of the applications that we already support, but you can also add your own. So you can go here, and then you can enter your own application. So again, you can make up an icon and make it available here. So it's so that is one. Then the second one is, what does this command, what is this action? I mean, I called it verb, but here we've used a custom value, but you can also do select from a list. And then these are the default that think about it as CRUD++, right? You can create, update, list, search, and so on. And you can also enter your own. So we had something here. I think I destroyed your recipe, but if we don't save it, we should be okay. And then the actual object that this operates on. So again, this is like a default list of objects, and you can always add your own too. So that sort of addresses the question. Okay, good. So do you want to continue on? We can sort of continue with the command reply.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So what we want to do here, or what this recipe is attempting to do, let me just condense this part, is to post this new hire message, right, in the manager channel, and suggest that this new employee should be provisioned certain applications. At the same time, so together, these two messages come together, actions 4 and 5.
And we have 4 and 5 mainly because sometimes the actual work in that happening in a downstream system could take some time. So we send a message saying, "Hey, I'm working on it." That's sort of what this is.
Yes, exactly. So command replies. In practice, it's always recommended to make your bot interactions as human as possible. So every time it receives input from the user or users talking to it, it should always respond, right? Just like talking to another human being. It's pretty rude if you don't respond. So yeah, so basically over here in action 5, we actually WorkBot prompts the manager whether or not this account provisioning should be approved. And so how it's done is it comes in the form of a button. So it scroll all the way down to buttons.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and this button,
actually,
yeah, this button, right, actually acts as like passing parameters to the next recipe, which I'll show in a moment. But basically, by clicking approve, this recipe is actually triggering the bot command in the next recipe. Yeah, yeah.
So this is the way to create buttons, and every button has a on button click event associated with it. And in the way WorkBot works is when the user clicks on the button, you link it to another WorkBot command.
Yes, exactly.
So in this case, we have an approve button and a reject button. And then if you click the approve button, it sort of executes this particular command.
Exactly.
And when you click the reject, it clicks the same command, but with different input arguments.
Exactly.
Got it.
So
So how does this look, John? Can you show like how this button actually looks in the Slack?
Okay, just a second, right? I just need to explain for you guys. I think you guys would be pretty interested in knowing how this thing is even, how does this work, right? So basically what we're showing here is there are two buttons, right? Approve and reject. For approve, these are the commands that the button actually executes. So when a user clicks this button on Slack, you're actually sending a command, workday provision user, followed by a bunch of parameters that may be used for the next recipe. Okay, and the same thing for reject. So now let's go to the next recipe. Okay, let's try and do a refresh so that the recipe is not ruined.
We support versioning. You can go back.
Okay. So, okay. So once again, what this recipe does, right, is to actually perform all the execute all the actions after the manager has clicked on approve or reject. So it starts with a command. So this command, pretty interestingly, actually retrieves information from the button click from the previous recipe. So if you guys remember, WorkBot provision user, right? You see this? So it's the same format, application, the action, as well as the business data. But if you look here, this is actually where this is actually sent by the buttons. Here, you see this? Workday provision user. Yeah, and these are the parameters that you want to send over to the next recipe as well, which is why the same input parameters show up over here as well. Okay, cool. So let's try and show this out. So the rest of the recipe basically just checks whether the manager has approved it or not, checking the status here, right? So if it's approved, then like once again, it will feed back to the user that, okay, I've accepted your input, that it's being approved, and try to perform the actions. Okay, so in this case, it'll try to get the information about this employee from Workday and attempt to create the user on ServiceNow. Okay, so this is basically from 4 to 8, right? And for 9 to 12 over here,
we do this because we want to make sure the user doesn't already exist.
Exactly.
So that is what step 6 is. If it is already there, you're not going to create it.
Yes, exactly. So you don't want to create like duplicate users, right? Yeah.
Or a user with the same name.
Yeah,
you want to give them a different. Okay.
Really messy. Yeah. So same thing for 9 to 12. You're basically trying to upset the user, like search the user first. If he exists or not, then you'll do an upset for Salesforce. So basically this recipe is just creating.
So we are here. We have access to an upsert action. So instead of having to do a search, if found, update, otherwise create, we can use upsert. But in ServiceNow, we just have to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the difference is just purely based on how the different
APIs, what the APIs support.
Yeah. So they understand info in a different way and they can do different things. So okay. So once again, if you notice, our recipes have a lot of command replies, and that helps with the user experience on Slack. Okay. So over here, it's just responding. We are asking WorkBot to respond to the users that to the manager in the manager channel that the user has been created with, and furnish it with some details, right? Just to confirm that, yeah, indeed, these accounts have been provisioned. And it also notifies HR that, yes, the accounts have been provisioned as well, okay? In the event that the manager actually rejects the approval, right? Then, he himself, the manager who rejects, he gets a notification. But more importantly, HR also gets a notification that, hey, it's not been approved, it's rejected. So you might want to verify worker details. Yeah, so it's a very nice automated flow over here.
Okay. So in this use case, there was something about in this use case where you're going to show sort of approved verified user access as well.
Yes, exactly. So you don't want. When we spoke about approving earlier, it's actually pretty pretty serious thing, right? Somebody of authority must be the one to approve it, especially if it's accessing, Salesforce with sensitive data and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we have these use cases with payrolls as well. So someone actually has to approve something for payroll processing. So quite important that the right person does it.
Exactly. Okay, so why don't we just run through like how this thing actually works in practice? Okay, so if you see here, I'm the approving manager in this case. So I'm just doing my own work, minding my own business. And okay, let me just start the recipes first. Okay, so the recipes have begun or not. Okay. Let me see if I can change the connection.
So Gautam, there is a question while John works on that. So in the demos so far, you've shown the interaction is in a direct message with the WorkBot. The question is it possible to include the WorkBot in a channel where it's interacting with people and taking commands?
Yes. I mean, we sort of absolutely. We sort of typically do our demos with the in DM mode is so that you don't have to type at the bot name. So, for example, if I were to talk to so here to talk to the bot, since I'm in a channel, I have to say at HR bot and then say help. So it's just to save some typing. We show it in DM, but of course it can be.
It's the same way you do it in Slack when you.
That's right. When you want to address it to a specific person, same thing.
But the rest of it is the same in terms of the interaction following once you've called the WorkBot.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the interaction, is it the same in a channel as it is with the direct message, or are there differences?
It is the same. It's just that every time you sort of talk to WorkBot, you have to the bot. You have to address it with @bot name.
Okay. And the other question is like, can there be a single instance of WorkBot because different teams may want to build out their own bots in a company, right?
Yes.
There could be a helpdesk bot. There could be an HR bot. So what are the best practices around that? The answer to the first question is yes, you can have multiple bots. I guess one way to think about it is WorkBot is a default bot that we make available. And of course, you can change WorkBot's name and icon associated with it and so on. But if you then want to have one more bot, let's say this one was for HR, and then you want a bot for sales, then you would have to go into Slack and create basically an additional client registration. So essentially, you get your own OAuth client ID, and then you use that
and you configure that in Workato to create your next bot.
Okay.
So otherwise, as far as if you sort of use the same default work bot, then as far as Slack is concerned, it is one bot, and then it just ends up having multiple handlers. So to sort of avoid that, you basically create its own set of its own OAuth app.
Okay. And given these are separate bots and will be used by separate departments from a data security standpoint, there's no overlap in what information a HR bot uses versus a support bot uses, right? Like meaning they're completely powered by different recipes, so there's no exchange. Okay.
That's correct. So they are powered by different recipes. The recipes can be in different accounts also.
Okay.
And then even if they were in the same accounts, you can assign certain types of privileges so that one group, sales group, can only see a certain connection, marketing group can only see a certain connection.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Okay, so thanks for answering those questions. I think we are good to go right now. So what I'm going to do here is rerun an old job.
So you're rerunning it just to sort of to simulate that there is a new employee.
Exactly. Because we don't really want to create a new user in Salesforce now because they'll charge us.
Workday?
No, I mean like when we provision the account in Salesforce.
I see.
Yeah. So So yeah, let's try to trigger this out. Okay. So we're triggering this job. So again, a reminder: what happens here is there's a new or updated worker on Workday. Sweet. Okay. So now let's take a look at Slack and see what happened. So I'm the manager, and I'm just minding my own business. But suddenly I get this message that a new employee is being onboarded. A guy called Logan McNeil. Welcome to the company. And he's a systems analyst, so he should have access to Salesforce and ServiceNow. Okay. So I look at this and like, okay, it seems to check out. So I'll click on approve. So if you look over here, WorkBot's actually trying to provision this account. Okay. So
in this case, WorkBot went and created accounts in Salesforce and ServiceNow, and since looks like you already had given your authorization to WorkBot, so it didn't ask you to authorize yourself again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should we remove that authorization and try it again?
Yeah, let's try and do that. Okay. So I'll go to HR bot, type help.
I think so what we expected to see here, so what happened earlier was we ran into a limit with the number of users allowed on our Salesforce. So is that what we ran into again?
Yeah, so basically, we ran into that again.
Okay, I think I didn't want to do that.
No, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, what happens right now is that the apps have been provisioned on Salesforce and ServiceNow. So if you look,
and I guess what we expected to see when this request came in, when you click that button to approve, we expected to see whether this particular. So what you see here is it is asking the manager to authorize themselves.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And so we expected to see this, and since we had actually done this before, that connection was cached. I mean, and there is a way to disconnect it. We provide a way to disconnect it, and I'll show that to you. But this is key, right? Because you are in a channel where there's a lot of people in the channel, and then anyone should not be able to approve it, though anyone can see it. So then the person that approves it basically has to authorize themselves. And in this case, it is asking them to authorize themselves against Salesforce, and it'll verify that whether this person is indeed the hiring manager. If they are, it's going to sort of allow them to go ahead and do this. And how is this set up? So can we look at the recipe to sort of show how this actually works?
Yeah. Cool. So this is how you actually set up verified user access on runtime. So you head to the recipe and you go to settings. And when you scroll down, you can actually turn on verify user access at runtime for these 3 applications that are currently supported: Workday, Salesforce, and ServiceNow.
I mean, those are the recipes. Those are the connections used in this recipe.
Yes.
And the sort of, just from a background perspective, when you run a recipe, the default mechanism is the set of connections that are bound to it at the start of the recipe. When you say start, is what it typically works with. But you can then override that at runtime, as in at runtime, depending on some data, it determines what connection to use. And that is what happens here when you actually turn on that. You're basically saying that, hey, verify the Salesforce connection at runtime, so it doesn't use the connection that's bound to it.
Exactly.
Okay. And yeah. We have some questions.
So we're almost towards the end of the webinar. There's a couple of questions, but folks, please take a minute to give your feedback on how we could make this session more useful for you, what kind of content, the format you'd like.